Welcome to the Block 4 tutorial. So this block is made up of 5 pieces. We have our C, our D, our I, our G, and our B2 piece. So we're going to go over to start cutting this out and see how it's put together. All right, so now we are moving on to our block 4. And we have our B2 piece. We cut that out in block 1, so if you need to see that again, you can go to block 1. We have our G piece, which we just cut out in block 3, so if you need to see that again, you can go to that video. And then we have block D, which we did in block 2's video. So if you'd like to see that again, you can go ahead over to block 2's video. And then block C. Now we haven't cut out block C together yet, but it is the exact same as block E, just flipped the other way. So make sure you are paying attention to which one you're using because they are exactly the same shape, just inverted. So I'm not going to show you that since we've already done it with block C. It would work the same. So you can go ahead to video for block 2 if you want to see that done again. But the basic tip there is utilize those leftover pieces from your B1 and B2, those holes that those create. And then, so that's block C. So what we have not done yet that we are going to introduce is block I, or I'm sorry, I'm calling it block, but it's template. So template I. And if you're looking at your pattern pieces, it's not in this block, but just so you're aware, there's also a template J. And just like with C and E, it is the same piece, but reflected. So make sure you're using the correct piece. It'll make a big difference for you. So we are using I in this block. So if we look at our chart together, so we're on page 3 for block 4. So we have block 4A and 4B. So again, if you're doing the baby or the pillow or the wall hanging, you're just going to make one of each of these. So one block of 4A and one block of 4B. And if you're doing one of the throws, you'd be making 9 of each. So reading through my chart, I need a color 6 of I, color 5 of G, a color 4 of D, color 3 of C, and a color 2 of B2. So that's what I have laid out over here right now. And we're going to cut together out piece I, and that is in my fabric 6. So let's go ahead and do that. Get these templates out of the way. So this is kind of I usually save these I and J pieces to cut out to towards the end because they are the smallest templates and they're good at fitting in some of our weird leftover spaces. But I still have a lot of space to work with on this fabric piece. So I'm lining my straight edge up with the raw edge of my fabric here. Again, this is a great opportunity if you wanted to use a ruler to place over it and cut for a nice easy straight edge. And again, either rotary cutter works fine for this block. They're not very drastic curves for this one, but I think it'll probably be easier for you to see what I'm doing if I use my smaller rotary. And then again, try to always cut away from you. It's very tempting just to come back around this way. But if I slipped, I would likely hurt myself. So we are going to go away from ourselves. Okay. And as you can see, that was a really simple, easy piece to cut out. And it's a nice small size. So then when we go to piece, it's all gonna come together. So when we take this over to our machine, you can see there really could be a couple ways you could piece this. If you pieced these two together, you would make the K pattern piece. But I think what is easiest for people would be to piece our C and D pieces together, which creates like an A pattern piece. And then you're gonna piece together your G and I, which will make a like a B1 pattern piece. And then we're gonna add on our B2. So once we assemble all of the different units together, you're essentially going back to assembling an orange peel. So we're going ahead and go do that. Okay, we're ready to piece block 4. And this is going to come together like an orange peel block as well. We're going to start by putting together our C and D pieces to make our what would be an A template, right? And then we are going to piece together our G and I pieces to make essentially a B2 piece. All right, so we're going to start. I'm going to put these out of the way, and we're going to start with piecing these guys just like we did in block 2. So I'm finding my center points. Finger pressing those. Okay. And we're going to pin that together. Okay, so those are now snipped and pressed open, and we're ready to move on to the next part. So we're going to set this aside for now, and we are going to bring in our G and I pieces. Now, if you look at our I piece, it almost looks symmetrical, but it's not. So we have a smaller curve on our right and a longer, more shallow curve on our left. So we want the smaller curve to line up with our G pattern piece to make that nice gradual curve that we need for our A template piece. Okay, so I actually tackle these units differently than I do all the others. I don't pin for the center and sew. I just place them right sides together. And you can see I've lined up this edge and the first like 1/4 inch of that edge, okay? And start sewing. Get that back stitch in there. And then I'm just going to slowly bend these into each other. get towards the end, I actually I always end up crossing. It seems easier for some reason, but I want, or actually even a stiletto might be even easier. I want to make sure that this blue piece is now very vertical, okay? So that it's going straight. And then I'm going to bring the G piece, kind of gently bring it down, and then hold it down with my stiletto here. And that's just gonna get that so very straight. So that's how that comes together, right? And like everything else, I'm going to snip into my seam and press it open. Okay, so that has now been snipped and pressed open, and it's essentially now our B2 piece, and this unit is essentially now our A template piece. And what we're going to do, we are actually going to line these up where these seams here meet. So we are going to bring these right sides together, and we are going to line up these seams, and then I'm going to pin them in place. Okay, and then I'm also going to pin my ends like we did when we were putting together A and B1 pieces. So now it's essentially just making an orange peel from here on out. And if you have a little bit of extra at the end, that's okay, because the most important part is that that centerpiece seam lines up. And we're fully covered on the other end as well, so. Okay, so now my seam has been snipped and pressed open, and I'm very happy with how those 4 points lined up like that. It's beautiful. But you can see, like I was like 1/8 of an inch short up here, and about 1/4 of an inch too long down here. So to get this lined up perfectly, this was a little imperfect, and that's okay. This is going to be covered with a B2 piece and the second trim off. So just like we did earlier, and again, I don't condone cutting on your acrylic table. It's probably bad for it. I am going to line up a ruler, and I have my line here just to make sure everything is level, and I'm just gonna trim off this little bit. So now it's gonna be really easy to add on my B2 piece. So I'm gonna fold our unit here, our block, in half and mark my center. Right there, and I'm going to do the same with my B2 pattern piece. So I'm folding that in half. And I'm marking for my center. Okay. And then I'm going to pin my ends in place as well, lining up all these raw edges together. And again, down here, this is gonna get about a 1/4 inch trimmed off. So I've just passed over this seam and I'm gonna backstitch. So that is the end of piecing for block 4. And like I've done with all the others, I'm gonna snip into my seam and go press it open. Okay, so we've finished piecing together block 4. We've pressed and snipped and pressed our seam open, and we're ready to go to the cutting mat to square it up. So we're now squaring up block 4. And depending on which quilt you're making, you're either squaring up to a 6.5 inch square or a 7.5 inch square. So you want to check your instructions for what size you need. For what I'm doing, I need a 7.5 inch square. So I am going to be using this 10-inch ruler. And I like to always start, if there's a corner where like a lot of points really come together, that's a good starting point for lining things up. So right now, I've put this top 1/4 inch square right, this 1/2 inch, like all the points come together, and the dead center of this 1/2 inch square is right where all of these seams come together. And so that's like really perfect. And then if I follow down, so at my 7.5 inch line, I want a 1/4 inch of my eyepiece here. So you can see my 1/4 inch line like just hits on this curve. All right, and then if I travel over at my 7.5 inch, it's a little too far. It needs to come just a little this way, which is fine. I mean, we're talking centimeters here. Okay. There we go. So now everything is still the same. If I follow my 7.5 inch line and 7.5 inch line, that will be a perfect 1/4 inch orange square spot right there. So I'm gonna go ahead, trim this off. And I'm gonna slide this up. everything up with those 7.5-inch lines. I think that's close. Okay, so I'm gonna double check everything. That's got my 1/4 inch square, 1/4 inch square, and if I slide all the way here, I got that perfect 1/4 inch square. I'm just gonna tap it up a little. Yeah, that looks better. It's really good. All right. So now I can trim the block up, which is really trim the block down. All right, so there we go. We have a